we have a referendum date. 6 weeks from now, Australia will decide whether to back a voice to Parliament and recognise Indigenous Australians in the Constitution. And today, the Yes campaign came out firing.
I'll call. In my language, I asked the ancestors from the 4 directions to come here.
My friends, please recognise our spirit and our people and our place.
The song was to welcome you and your ancestors here to this land. So today, we look after each other and make the right decision.
The idea for a voice came from the people.
In the Uluru Statement, our people chose generosity. We chose unity, we chose love.
And it will be decided by the people.
And 6 years after we read out the Uluru Statement to the Australian people, the time is now.
Today I announce that referendum day will be the 14th of October. You're being asked to vote for an idea, to say yes to an idea whose time has come.
There comes a time in the life of every nation when it must put right the injustices of the past. A time to say no more to exclusion and prejudice. A time for us to be our better selves.
What Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people want for their children is what you want for yours. Staying healthy, doing well at school, being safe and leading fulfilling lives.
This referendum is about positive empowerment, recognition through a voice.
On the morning after this vote, we will know something new about ourselves and each other.
In 6 short weeks, when we wake up on October 15, we need to be able to look our neighbour in the eye and honestly say, we did our bit.
But if we vote yes, we will have seized the moment of profound national unity. A moment that says, we stand with you, we see you, we need to hear you.
When we cast our votes, allow us to summon the courage to be motivated by faith, hope and love. Motivated by the pursuit of a better future over an unsatisfactory status quo.
We ask all Australians on this very important day to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future.
So in a spirit of generosity and optimism, vote yes. In recognition of 65,000 years of history, vote yes. With hope for a better future, vote yes.
Labor Senator Penny Wong was at today's announcement. Senator, we saw a lot of emotion there, a lot of hope, but for undecided Australians, or perhaps Australians you've already lost, what concrete difference would a voice to Parliament actually make?
Well, the voice is ultimately about recognition, listening and better outcomes. It's an idea that's been put forward by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and it is, in fact, a committee to provide advice on matters that matter to them. Today, as you said, was emotional and in a good way. There were a lot of First Nations people there, First Nations representatives, leaders, for whom this is important and who have worked on this for years.
We just spoke to Bridget McKenzie earlier in the show, of course, your opposite number here as a national senator. She makes the argument that actually there are plenty of people to listen to already. They are already making representations. They're saying lots of things. That's not the problem. The problem is the way that government and Parliament responds to that, and that a voice simply doesn't fix that.
First, I think it's kind of a good thing to listen to the people who this affects. And 8 out of 10 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians support the voice. The second point I'd make is this idea hasn't come from Canberra. It hasn't come from political parties. It hasn't come from the Labor Party. it came out of consultations across our country. So what I'd say to Bridget and to others is maybe we should listen to the people who are affected so that we can get better outcomes, so we can spend money on the things that matter and not waste money where it doesn't work.
Senator, a year ago, 65% of the country supported this. Now the yes vote is sitting at 48%. It looks like it's heading for a loss. What happened?
Look, change is always hard, and it's quite useful, isn't it, to go back through history and think about all the things that we've had to fight for to change our country. And very, very rarely is that change won easily, whether it's the previous referenda, whether it's marriage equality more recently, whether it's native title legislation or the apology, which was opposed by Bridget McKenzie's party and by many others. And now we look back at many of these events and we think, well, they were good things, but they were opposed at the time. And I think we're seeing that now. What I'd say to your viewers is, if you don't know, please find out. Please talk to people. Please go to the website. Please talk to the many community volunteers from sporting clubs to communities of faith who are supporting this, so they can listen to your questions and answer them.
Australians are being asked to do something they've never really done before here, though, because they're being asked to establish a new institution in the Constitution. And there is no other provision in the Constitution that provides for just one group of Australians in contradistinction to the rest of Australia. This is a major plank in the no case. And this is clearly something that bothers a lot of people that are thinking about voting no. So what's your argument against that? What would you say to them?
What I'd say to them is a vote for no means more of the same. And let's remember what more of the same is. It's a suicide rate that's twice as high. It's incarceration rates which are higher. It's poorer outcomes in health and education. It's poorer outcomes for kids. You're less likely to see your first birthday if you're an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. It's an ask which isn't about special rights. It's an ask that is about making sure Parliament and government can listen to our first Australians who we know do experience an enormous disadvantage and, of course, want much more for their children. It's a point the PM made today.
The fact that the status quo is intolerable doesn't necessarily mean that whatever's proposed to fix it is a good idea. And this is really what the argument ends up being about, and about how far this goes. A lot of people arguing no are worried about whether there's something next. So reparations, is this the first step in a path towards paying the rent, or treaty as the next thing? Is it?
Yeah, well, that's, no, of course it's not, and you know that, Walid, and I appreciate you have to put that to me, but those of us who've been around in politics for a while might remember the Mabo debate or the WIC debate or the apology debate. The apology was opposed by Peter Dutton and John Howard and many in the coalition at the time, and on that basis, on the basis of some of the misinformation or the things that you've just put to me.
Treaty is not misinformation, though, is it? Treaty is specifically in the Uluru Statement.
Well, we're voting on a voice. We're voting on an advisory committee. That's what we're voting on. And whatever people might think about other matters, that is what we are voting on, and that is all we are voting on. And one of the things that strikes me about the No campaign is they want to talk about everything else. I want to talk about everything. It's like I heard Senator McKenzie, putting forward a whole range of propositions about how the voice would operate. What she didn't say is that if Australians vote yes, she and Peter Dutton and everyone else in the Parliament will have an opportunity to legislate what the voice does look like, what its composition is, what its powers are, what its functions are. She will have a part to play in that.
6 weeks to go. Senator Wong, thanks for your time.
Yeah, it's great to be with you all. Thanks very much.
After months of waiting, we've got a date.
The idea for a voice came from the people, and it will be decided by the people. Today I announce that referendum day will be the 14th of October.
That leaves just 6 weeks for both camps to sway voters.
The question is a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve this proposed alteration?
In order to be successful, the referendum needs an overall majority of votes in a majority of states.
We can close gaps and make better policies by listening to the voices of communities who know the problems they face and the solutions they need.
But overall support for the voice is steadily trending down, from around 65% last year, now down below 48% in multiple national polls.
Let's leave everything on the field. No stone unturned, and let's get this done.
Polling shows WA and Queensland both inclined to vote no. Victoria and New South Wales the states most likely to vote yes, making Tassie and South Australia key battlegrounds for the referendum to be successful. Highlighted by the Yes campaign launching in Adelaide today.
When we wake up on October 15, we need to be able to look our neighbour in the eye and honestly say, we did our bit.
So we finally got a date, but just how divisive will the next 6 weeks be?
We've got a Prime Minister who just deliberately withholding detail from the Australian public. He says that all of the detail will be provided after the vote takes place. If you don't know, vote no.
We know that well over 80% of our communities support a voice. Those who don't support a voice get 80% of the media coverage.
It is that old rule of divide and conquer that I can't stand for. I'm not going to allow a line to run straight through the middle of my family within our Constitution.
Our Australian story goes back 65,000 years. It's up to all of us to write the next chapter together. And we can start by writing one word: yes.
National Senator and No campaign advocate Bridget McKenzie is here to discuss what happens next. Senator, what is it about the voice that you're so worried about?
Great to be with you, Waleed, and great to hear the Prime Minister has announced the date that we head to referendum. As you know, I'm a very respectful no. I'm absolutely committed to reconciliation and recognition. But unfortunately, the voice and the constitutional change being proposed won't actually deliver the outcomes that are being sought. It's also being touted as quite risky. We've got constitutional experts that are very, very concerned about enshrining the voice in our founding document and the implications that will have for High Court decisions going forward.
Sorry, Senator, can I just stop you there, though? That's actually only a very small number. Over and over, we've seen former High Court justices, for example, come out and say they're not concerned about the constitutional implications of this, and where, for example, coalition politicians have cited them, they've been citing them in a misleading way.
Well, Waleed, with respect, the High Court is a small number of judges that actually determine the interpretation of our Constitution, and their judgments have very, very profound impacts across our whole nation, and Australians know that. And so they would rather our Parliament, that's elected by all of us, make decisions that impact us, rather than a handful of judges that sit off to the side, that are unelected, determining significant impacts on Australians' way of life. So even if it is a handful of constitutional experts, you can't simply dismiss that.
Well, how do you then improve the outcomes for vulnerable First Nations people then, Senator? What are your ideas?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely the question. When I was the minister, when that young 2-year-old was raped in Tennant Creek, I was sent in by the Prime Minister to negotiate a deal with the Territory Government to actually put real infrastructure, social infrastructure on the ground in that community to make things better. And things have improved over time. Have they gotten where we all want them to be? Of course they haven't. Can we change the way we make decisions and work more deeply and in an embedded way with those vulnerable communities? Yes, we can. But it takes political will and courage.
These are not new issues or new problems that we're trying to solve. You seem to be saying it's really a matter of political will. You were in government for 9 years. Before that, the Howard government was in power for, 11? That's 2 decades. Were these 2 decades without political will? Why do we still have these problems if it's about political will only?
Well, Waleed, you know that it's not just the federal government that has jurisdiction in this area. State governments are, overseeing both the education system and the health system, which are fundamentally important to improving some of those indicators we want in closing the gap. When we were in government, we set up a procurement policy called Supply Nation, which really forced industry and government departments to hire Indigenous companies who employed Indigenous Australians, so that economic empowerment, which is so foundational for a better future, was actually incentivised through government spending.
Sure.
So there is a long way to go.
My point is,
to say that nothing,
right?
to say...
So for everything that our current system, every policy has tried to develop, this is where we currently are. The idea of the voice is for policy to be developed with the benefit of proper advice and consultation from the people on the ground. Doesn't that seem like a mechanism, a way of improving policy, of getting better outcomes?
Well, Waleed, I've said I'm a very respectful no, and that I'm committed to reconciliation and recognition, and my entire working life shows that I live that out in action. I'm also part of a political party that proportionally represents more Indigenous Australians, and as one, we knew that this was not the answer to the communities that we represent. The fact that nobody knows how these representatives will be elected, that Canberra could have potentially the same amount and number of representatives as Western Australia seems incredible to me, and a model that simply favours academic elites over local Indigenous Australians who absolutely need to have their voices heard. They need to be listened to, and we want local solutions. So why hasn't the government funded the Yipirinya Aboriginal boarding proposal in Alice Springs, a boarding school that was costing just over $10 million to help those young Aboriginal students from town camps coming into Alice Springs to get a better education? The principal said to me when I went there as minister, we need $10 million to set this up so they don't have to go home and potentially not come back or be subjected to a lifestyle at home that isn't advantageous to their ongoing learning, and yet the Labor Party refused to fund it. So there are solutions on the ground that people could implement right now that are being proposed by Indigenous Australians and local communities, but the government isn't listening to them. So I think you can't have it both ways. You can't say you can only hear Aboriginal Australians' issues in remote communities by having the voice, because the reality is they're standing up and making themselves heard right now, and the government isn't listening.
Senator McKenzie, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Waleed.